Tactics, you want to answer a few questions? Great. Number one, who is our ally? A, the police officer whose job it is to murder and incarcerate people of color. B, the protest marshal who turns lawbreakers over to that police officer. C, the liberal march organizer who insists the protest cannot include violence or aggression against property or people. Or D, the peasant farmers in foreign lands who are aggressively and violently burning Monsanto.
So I would put that around to say our ally is lurking in a place that we've forgotten.
Okay.
Ourselves. And so the future of food is not an option. The future of food is going to be fixed by people kind of cultivating primary things. So, of all the ones who are our ally, the only thing there is C.
C? All right. Number two, which of the following actions is the most violent? A, smashing the windows of a giant corporation. B, defending yourself when police attack you. C, shooting gaping bloody holes in the chest of the man responsible for adding hundreds of supermax torture chambers to Colorado's prison system. Or D, remaining lawful and passive in the face of an ultra-violent global capitalist empire that murders, enslaves, and steals land from millions of people around the world. C? Alright. Number three, whose fault is it if children or the elderly get injured at a protest? A, the police officers who injure them. B, the cops who came to the protest armed to the teeth and looking for a fight. Or C, the agents of the state with badges who maintain our corrupt social order using violent force.
C.
C? Number four, which of the following social movements was complete or mostly nonviolent? A, America's 1960s civil rights and anti-war movement. B, India's independence movement. C, the Arab Spring. Or D, American oppositions to invasions in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Everyone says it's the correct answer.
It is the correct answer. There was definitely violence involved in it. Okay, so how did that work out? A, it failed miserably. Or B, we're still working on it, man. We just need those poor foreign people to hold out for another decade, and then we'll bring all the troops home, I promise.
I did go, but nothing before or after.
Number six, why would you limit your protest tactics to those which have historically proven to be ineffective? A, we are blissfully ignorant of the history of struggle. B, we are blindly in love with the myths of Gandhi and MLK. C, we are hopelessly self-absorbed and crazy about actually seeing blood on our hands. D, we can't get our docile bodies out of this nasty proto-fascist neoliberals late-stage capitalist funk. Or E, we don't like winning.
I'd say E, we're afraid of winning.
Afraid of winning. Number seven, how does nonviolence protect the state? A, nonviolence is ineffective. B, nonviolence is racist. C, nonviolence is statist. D, nonviolence is patriarchal. E, nonviolence is deluded. Or F, all of the above. All right. And I think your employee also wanted me to talk to you about self-imposed austerity.
Yes.
So it's my theory or my thinking is that self-imposed austerity just allows more resources to be consumed by the richer and super rich.
Explain that.
If we stop consuming resources by growing backyard food and shitting in buckets and being vegan and all the rest of those things, that doesn't actually change the social order that it's set up to exploit people and destroy those resources. It just frees more resources for the people who are going to continue to consume them anyway, because the super rich are consuming more than any of us anyway. And so why would we self-impose the austerity they need us to impose upon ourselves in order to free up resources for them to consume? Why would we participate in that?
Well, I think that the assumption is that if you extract yourself from something that's a legion of consumers generating wealth. Number one. Number two, all the things that you mentioned in a very passively aggressive way, shitting in buckets.
I've done those things.
Yeah,
I love those things.
Like the point is this, there's a cartoon that I saw that's like a politician on the end of a board over a cliff, and a series of people yelling at buildings or yelling at and one person getting off the board, caption saying people don't know their cheap out, meaning that the only thing that Monsanto hasn't done anything to this institution hasn't imposed anything on us. These are all manifestations of values that we hold as members in this system. And food is literally the most defining act, right? Agriculture, if you trace it back, is really sort of the beginning of class systems, like control, right? They go back and do anthropological digs, and they see more ornate graves versus some that are barren. That's the first time they've seen it. So 10,000 years ago it started. Meaning that occurred because knowledge was able to be concentrated by few. Gold isn't what made Midas. It was access to grain and food. And so what's changed now is this, access to knowledge. Right? And we're here screaming the buildings to plead with Monsanto and institutions to change it when literally food is one thing you can do and take an individual level. And it's not going to, so to your point, it's not going to full scale like change everything, but if you start with an individual, then it grows to communities, and it grows to...
But if you have a community who has like actual food sovereignty and is growing all their own food and like raising their own animals and all that stuff, the police are going to come and shut that community down because Monsanto works with the people inside this building to make it illegal to raise chickens and blah, blah, blah,
They
blah.
need us. They need us to be dependent on the food system.
Right. And then they use the police, they use the violent force of the state to keep us dependent.
So here's the one thing that you're missing, and now we're not talking about it, like, the reason we're here is not arguing whether the food system's productive. It's very productive, right? You agree with that. It's the underlying assumptions that make it productive that are in question. I mean, all of the resources that you're talking about extracted. Right. For those high elites to use in their selfish endeavors, those are not forever cheap to extract or in abundance.
Right.
And so when those change,
as they become less abundant, the super rich need us to consume less of them so they can consume more of them.
But the thing is, we are the super rich, right? Like, by virtue of where we are now.
I mean,
and so what I'm saying,
do you know about like wealth and class disparity in America and how like the 1%?
Yeah, but I understand that, but like by virtue of the fact, like I'm talking relative to the rest of the world too.
Sure.
Let's think about that perspective. Yeah. And so, but material wealth doesn't translate to food security. And so what prompted us, on our line, is we had an exchange program with farmers from and they came here and did an exchange program to learn about our urban farming, what we're doing, what people are doing to sort of empower things. They said, one of them said, he came from a small village in Ghana. He said, look, I came here expecting to see the richest country in the world, and in fact, you guys are the brokest motherfuckers. Everyone in my village has a boat. Everyone in my village has a farm. If a truck doesn't make it over I-70, you guys are screwed. And that's a reality, so even the super wealthy, let's reach them and get them to change it. Let's get them to grow their own food because it has
if you can do that, then more power to you.
Let me give you an example. In 1943, what an IBM executive said, there's probably a worldwide market for 5% computers. What are you recording this as? Right. The point is, it's totally weird. It's the easiest thing to...
There's a class structure and there's a ruling class in this country that is going to maintain that inequality, and they're going to maintain that inequality until we are actually threatening their lives.
Until we consciously choose not to participate. No one's holding us back.
But they are.
No.
I mean, there's people with guns right over there.
I understand. Right, but like literally, right? So let's take an example of my family, right? My wife's a teacher, and I won't tell you what she earns, but it's below, let's just say for the sake of argument, it's $30,000. And I work as well. Right now, we both work. We pay about $20,000 for someone else to grow our food. We pay $12,000 for someone to raise our kids. We pay $3,000 for her to drive away. And in the end, and then the government takes 87 of the days that she works away from her. So if we can grow our own food, right, she stops working. Right? But what does that do to the tax base? It decreases it.
I agree with you, but I think that there's another element that you are missing. I live on like $9,000 a year.
Sure.
I eat out of trash.
Sure.
I consume as little as possible because I don't want to be contributing to this shit. But I also recognize that you can't just step out of the system. You have to make trouble within the system. You have to put something on on them. You have to put pressure on the people who have, on the ruling class, to not let them keep.
We're saying the same thing. Like, it's civil disobedience or self-reliance. It's 100% the same thing that we're saying.
But self-reliance alone is not adequate. We need to be pushing back, and we need to be fighting back. And so, civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience alone is not adequate. The reality is the ruling class are going to continue to run this world, and running this world for the ruling class means the death of people in massive numbers, and always has. And if we're going to interrupt that, we need to be putting real pressure, and we need to be actually threatening the lives of wealthy people. That's what it's going to take. No change has ever happened until the lives of wealthy ruling class people have been threatened. That's just a reality. I'm not comfortable with. I'm not happy about that. You know, I'm not shooting rich people left and right. But it doesn't make me feel good. But you gotta recognize that that's the world we live in. You know.
See, man, I don't like. I understand that you're at that place where you're coming from that perspective, and I like 100% respect that. But like, I do think literally like, and it is sort of idealistic to think that everyone can go to food. But if we were talking like 2 generations ago, the concepts that we're talking about are not that radical. And ruling class Monsanto institutions are giving us, as the members of it, exactly what we want. Conscious or not, we want cheap food so we can buy stupid shit, and we can go on vacations,
and
we can be numb to the fact,
to do that. And they're not going to stop doing that.
No, and it's not them, it's us. So to extract ourselves from them, they are us, as much as you don't want to admit it. Like, I'll
admit it. I have extracted myself from that, and I recognize that that's not adequate. That's not adequate.
What's far more disruptive is not giving them the power.
I've done that, and I've found it to not be adequate.
It needs to grow. Like it's got to like.
So we got to convince lots of other people to sit in buckets.
The point is, we're not going to have to convince, right? So what we're saying is we exist in a really cool period of time. You can look at 2 examples: Cuba and North Korea. Right? So those are sort of political, self-imposed. What happens to a society without access to fossil fuels, right? Or with limited access? Cuba struggled, now grows 68% of the food in urban environments, and has thrived. They wouldn't thrive according to the people that you're talking about in terms of the people at the highest level. Like, they didn't thrive from the capitalistic perspective, but they built a one-life community. Yeah. They built a self-reliant community. North Korea fucking imploded, right? And so we live at a time where we can relearn some skills that we've forgotten over 2 generations, and give ourselves sort of a softer landing before a crash happens, or we can just sit and do the same.
But so that softer landing is like delaying the crash. So we've got this like lack of resources.
I don't look at it as a crash. I don't look at and we're saying the same thing in terms of an end to. Of course there's llamas.
Okay. I didn't know there would be llamas.
Is your mama a llama? But the point is, like, here's the scary thing is, like, that cartoon. Going into that cartoon, like, we don't know the true value of the person. It's fucking scary, right? So, but we've been conditioned. And here's the example. I have a dog, 2 dogs, and it snowed. And it was that snowstorm 4 weeks ago. And there's a sort of glass sliding door. And my dog's water bowl's right there, sitting there. And I watched him for an hour paw at the door because he was out of water. Like, give me some fucking water, you asshole. Give me water. And I just sat there. Behind him was a bucket I had placed under the spout that was full of water in abundance of water. And all he had to do was turn around and see it. And so
I want to actually go back to that cartoon. So you've got the cartoon, you've got the politician at the end of the plank, and the one person walking off. Okay. So what you're proposing is that we get all those people to walk off so the politician falls over the plank. What I've observed through history. Okay. Well,
I'm not doing it for the sake of the politician, right? But continue.
Okay. You can either like try to get a whole bunch of those people to step off the plank, or you can get just 10% of those people to throw rocks at the politician until he falls off the plank, and then we do whatever we want. And that's the reality: is that every time that there's been a guerrilla war, whether it's the American Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, 10% of the population actually engaged in guerrilla warfare.
there's a rising consciousness. Like, I think that we have come a long way, right? And learned a lot. And I think the ironic thing is that if you think about it, like, agriculture is really what sort of started man separate. Because I'm an ecologist, I'm an environmentalist, right? But I come from the perspective of the ills that we face as humanity are that we've separated ourselves from this whole thing that we call cosmos, whatever. And, you know, agriculture is what formed that. And that agricultural mentality, prompted by, like, the promise of technology, created this, like, idea of scarcity, right? And, like, that's what makes it seem like, you know, it's us versus them. It's that Darwinian sort of idea of how the world works. And I think that we've reached the point of maturity where we're able to kind of take a look back in hindsight and say, you know, we tried a lot, we've grown a lot, and now we can kind of take a step back and reimagine a future where we are reconnected, where we see a world of abundance, and like where we kind of take the lessons that we learn from them, and apply them moving forward. It doesn't have to take violence, and I understand, like, and it probably will. It's inevitable, but don't look at it as like an end-all be-all, because the point of the whole fucking discussion is, who gives a fuck about politicians? Who gives a fuck about the people in power?
I give a fuck about them because they are trying to kill my friends.
You have so much
I have
power
friends on
as an
death row in
individual.
Ohio, and they're going to be killed if I don't do something about the government that is trying to kill them.
Sure.
And it's not just, and they, you know, them and 2.5 million other people who are incarcerated in this country who are primarily nonviolent offenders and people of color. That's the reality we live in. So we can go to our backyards and we can step out of the system, and that just allows the system to continue to incarcerate and
But how
enslave
is it
black
continue?
people.
Like, so
And that's
let's
not
take, for example,
acceptable.
let's take my wife not working. That's whatever 30% of $30,000, $10,000 is not going to the revenue. Okay? Imagine, you know, an entire population doing it. Just one parent. Let's say two-parent house with long videos and millions of dollars to
Well, we need to not just take it out. We need to put. We need to be putting pressure back. It's gonna just stepping back is not going to do it. Because if we continue to step back, if we continue to like choose poverty and to choose to
It's
not engage,
dude, that mindset, like choosing poverty, like what is empowering about the feeling that you have? Like what is enriching about it?
I am definitely empowered by the feeling of stealing shit from dumpsters, shoplifting from stores, shitting in buckets. I am empowered by those things. I fucking love them. But they are not gonna make real change to the structures in our society, which are like institutionalized racism and ultra violence and massive control.
Like the structures are self-imposed. You're talking like
No, those are imposed.
Listen,
those are imposed by the
from my
ruling class
perspective,
on the rest of
you're
us.
pawing at the screen door like my dog. Don't do
Okay.
that. There's
I
a
mean-
bucket of water being filled up right behind you.
I have friends who don't have access to that bucket of water, and if you said that to them, they would be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
White boy.
Yeah, that's the reality.
Okay.
We live in a violent, racist society that deprives people and marginalizes people. And so often this like farming in the backyard thing is very often a key to gentrification and displacement of poor people from those neighborhoods. The neighborhood that I live in Columbus, Ohio right now has had a community garden run by black people in the community for a long, long time. And all those people are displaced by all the white people who are coming in and putting in backyard gardens. In the backyard gardens. I'm not telling them how to do nothing. Yeah. What I'm saying is that white people coming into that neighborhood and setting up gardens in their backyards, including myself and my roommates, increase property values in that neighborhood, increase police presence in that neighborhood, and increase the displacement of those poor people and those marginalized people in that neighborhood. And so we need to be aware of the effect that our actions have on other people and other populations. Right now in America, the urban planners are trying to turn all the cities inside out. You've got all the wealthy people living in the suburbs and the poor people in the ghetto in the middle of the city. And that is not efficient. And so to increase the efficiency, they're trying to put rich people in the middle of the city and poor people on the edges of the city and make it more like Sao Paulo or Cape Town or any of these other countries where there's that kind of poverty. So instead of having ghettos, we're going to have shanty towns in the future. And sorry, but urban gardening is a key part of changing those neighborhoods and making those neighborhoods attractive to rich people from the suburbs. And so I'm not saying urban gardening is not good, but you need to do it in allegiance with your neighbors, and you need to also be fighting against the displacement of your neighbors. And you need to be also resisting, like, going out publicly and you turning that into something attractive to other privileged white people.
I think you make really good points, but I think you need to stop assuming that minorities are like my dog scratching at a door and completely helpless.